Hello, welcome to the conversation here on News Central Television. This is the program where we bring you all the latest updates and political happenings around the continent of Africa. I'm Benga Aboroa.
And I am Rita Omodia. Today on the conversation, we will be analysing the parliamentary elections in Senegal, where the ruling party has claimed victory. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, citizens who could not register in the continuous voter registration, which ended on Sunday, have expressed frustration over the refusal of the Independent National Electoral Commission to extend the exercise. Benga, these are two very interesting stories coming from Senegal, where we have even the opposition claiming victory in the parliamentary elections.
It's a game of numbers in Senegal, but first and foremost, I'd like to welcome you back to the conversation. I've missed you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to the program today. Quite a lot is happening in terms of politics on the African continent, and it's sad that we can't pack in as many as possible. But that's why we have other programs, and I'm sure the guys on VSA will pick the other big stories happening on the continent.
So right now we start off with situations in Nigeria where citizens have expressed displeasure over the refusal of the electoral body, that's the Independent National Electoral Commission, to extend the voter registration exercise. The stranded applicants say the decision of the commission to stop the CVR is a way to disenfranchise citizens. In preparation for the 2023 general elections, INEC began nationwide registration in June 2021 to enable Nigerians who had just attained the voting age and others to register.
The electoral body INEC planned to terminate the CVR, the continuous voter registration, on the 30th of June 2022. But after the court on June the 20th granted an order of interim injunction stopping INEC from closing the registration exercise, the electoral body extended until the 31st of July. Despite the extension of service to churches and other places in a bid to aid the registration, many Nigerians are yet to get registered and pleaded for further extension of the registration process. Now, joining us on the conversation this evening to discuss this is the National Commissioner and Chairman Information and Voter Education Committee at the Independent National Electoral Commission, Dr. Festus Okoye. Dr. Okoye, good evening to you and thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you so much.
Now, Dr. Okoye, it was reported that some of the centers where the continuous voter registration exercise happened lacked adequate equipment, and I'm sure INEC had ample time to prepare for this. How true is this, and what were some of the challenges INEC went through in organizing this continuous voter registration process?
In your intro, you mentioned the fact that this particular voter registration exercise, this continuous voter registration exercise, started on the 28th day of June 2021.
Yes.
That was when we opened the online portal for pre-registration of applicants. Thereafter, in July 2021, we started the physical registration of voters, of eligible voters in the 774 local government areas of Nigeria and in our 37 state offices. During this particular period, sometimes our registration officers will register a single individual a day. In other words, they had little or nothing doing. We extended mobilization and sensitization to the various communities, to the various registration areas. The turnout was still very low. We now decided to move the registration process to the 8,809 registration areas on a rotational basis. Yet, people did not really come out to come and register. The rush, the deluge, started when it was 2 weeks to the terminal date of the voters registration exercise. That was when we experienced a surge. And in response to that, we deployed an additional 109 registration IVED registration machines to the states where we experienced this surge. When the surge continued, we also deployed additional personnel and also additional IVED machines to all these states. Now, thereafter, of course, as you pointed out, there was a court order saying, "Oh, we should not stop the voters' registration exercise on the 30th day of June." And then we continue with the exercise. The court discharged the injunction and affirmed the sole right, the sole responsibility, and the sole discretion of the Independent National Electoral Commission to conduct voters' registration exercise and fix the terminal date for that exercise. But we extended it to the 31st day of July 2022. Now, the moment we announced the extension, people receded and went back home until it was 1 week to the terminal date. People now besiege the registration centers again. This exercise cannot go on ad infinitum. This is because the electoral management body needs time to clean up the register, to remove multiple and double registrants. We also need time to print over 28,500,000 documents for purposes of claims and objections. So that is just the challenge we have now.
All right, Dr. Okoye, you've clearly stated the fact that you deployed a lot of personnel. You talked about 109 additional registration centers. Now, you also mentioned the fact that at the earlier part, people failed to come out to register. In your own view, what do you think is the cause of this? Because we still saw people, which you also alluded to, that later on we saw people trooping in and a lot of people have not been able to register. So what do you think is responsible for the fact that people did not come in earlier to register?
Well, I can only do some level of speculation and also state some facts at my own disposal. The first is that I believe that with the performance of the Independent National Electoral Commission in the Do, Ondo, Anambra, Ekiti, and Osun governorship elections, people now believe that there's a possibility, and I use the word possibility advisedly, that when they vote, their votes will be made to count. People have also seen that the deepening of the use of technology in the electoral process has more or less obviated the pernicious human interference in the electoral process, to the extent that when people are voting, they now believe confidently that only the genuine votes will be counted. And I also believe that some younger elements within our country now believe that staying aloof and staying away from the electoral process will not advance the cause of democracy and the cause of the electoral process. And we have also created a platform for them to do their pre-registration online before going to our registration centers to go and capture their biometrics. And so there's also a possibility that there's a new impetus based on the conclusion of the primaries of the political parties. Maybe there's something people are seeing and some dynamic people are seeing that has made them to rekindle their energy and rekindle their interest in coming out to come and register.
Now, Dr. Okoye, looking at the experience and the high number of interest Nigerians have showed in the continuous voter registration exercise, what lessons has INEC picked from this? For example, in other climes, you have your voters' registration card mailed to you. Is that a possibility? Because we've seen after election cycle, we've seen market improvements in INEC, like the BVAS that was deployed and all of that. Is it something you're looking at addressing in the future so as to reduce this manual and the large crowds of people we see at the centers?
Well, the Commission is looking towards a direction of people using any form of ID, maybe a national ID, their international passport, or any other acceptable form of identity for the purposes of voting. So we are looking at that particular possibility because presently the data of each registered voter resides in the BVAS and not really in the PVC. What we normally do is that on election day, the presiding officer will look at the last 6 digits of the VIN number embedded in the PVC to use in calling up the voters' data from the BVAS. So in future, there's a possibility that people can just walk into any polling unit with any form of identity recognized by the government, and then use that particular identification to vote. But for now, it will be very difficult for the Commission to allow collection of PVCs by proxy or mail PVCs to people's homes. This is because we don't want our permanent voters cards to fall into the wrong hands. That is why we insist that if you make the effort to register, you should also make the additional effort of coming to and collect your PVCs when these PVCs are ready.
Future provisional plans for technological advancement in the registration for PVCs. Now, a lot of people that we saw were actually complaining at the fact that people are being disenfranchised from registration, and they also threatened to protest if this registration exercise is not extended. How would you react to this?
It will be an exercise in futility if the commission goes ahead with the CVR ad infinitum. The implication is that at the end, we are not going to clean up the voters register. If you recall, when we concluded the first and second quarter of the CVR, we subjected the data and the register to a cleanup process using our ABIs. At the end of the day, we found out that 46%, over 46% of all those who registered were either double or multiple registrants. We have to do that. Secondly, Section 19 subsection 1 of the Electoral Act makes it mandatory that the commission must display the voters register in the 774 local government areas of Nigeria and in the 8,809 registration areas for claims and objections. This is mandatory. The Act also makes it mandatory that 60 days before any election covered by the Constitution and the Act, we must submit to all the registered political parties a clean copy of the voters register, which has been integrated, and this is also mandatory. It is also mandatory for us to print the permanent voters cards and give to those who have registered. If we are unable to do all these things, the implication is that people cannot vote during the 2023 general election, and our remit and our mandate is to organize, undertake, and supervise elections, and that is what we are going to continue to do. The voters registration process is not the only thing the commission does. The commission has a whole gamut of issues to attend to before 2023. So we want to conclude this process and move on with other activities relating to the electoral process and relating to the 2023 general election.
Thank you, Dr. Okoye. Now, Dr. Okoye, the Biomodal Voter Accreditation System, otherwise known as BVAS, has been hailed by analysts as a huge step forward towards strengthening Nigeria's democracy, because it does make a rigging of elections harder and more cumbersome. But there's an issue with the BVAS system in the sense that if you have registered and if the BVAS doesn't read your biometrics, then they take your pictures, and after that, that's the second step. And if your picture doesn't match, then you will not be allowed to vote because there's no incident form. How is INEC planning to address those that might be disenfranchised as a result of that?
Now, you see, the issue is this. You know, prior to this particular period, some people engage in voter suppression, either by buying up people's PVCs and making sure that those people do not go to vote, or buying up people's PVCs and making attempts to vote on their behalf. What the BVAS has done is to stop that practice. If you come to the polling unit with a permanent voter's card that does not belong to you, the presiding officer will check the voter's register. Of course, the permanent voter's card is genuine, so the name on the permanent voter's card will be on the voter's register. The presiding officer will also look at the last 6 digits of the VIN number and use it to call up the data of the registered voter. Of course, it's a genuine PVC. Somebody registered with it. The data will pop up. The challenge now comes when the person is asked to verify his or her fingerprints or to authenticate it. Of course, it will not read because the person who has come to the polling unit is somebody who is with somebody else's permanent voter's card. Then if the person claims that he or she is a farmer or has been doing hard work and therefore the person's fingerprints have challenges, then the BVAS will read the person's facials. If the facial doesn't match, the implication and one conclusion is that the person standing before the presiding officer is engaged in identity theft. or that the person left his fingers at home or left his face at home. In which case, we will ask the person to go home and bring his fingers and also go home and bring his face. And so that is just as simple as that. So there's no issue of disenfranchisement. The BVAS is a robust technology, and we have tested it in various elections. In the Osun governorship election, nobody had any complaint. The same thing with the governorship election. So we are perfecting it to perform optimally in our elections.
Dr. Okay, that's a lot of faith in technology, because you're saying that the implication of what you just said now is there's no need for an incident form and the BVAS system is 100% foolproof.
I will not go to the extent of saying that the BVAS is 100% foolproof. The only thing I'm ready to say is that we have abolished the incident form, and the incident form has gone. Now, I'm not too sure that any technology is foolproof, but with the successes we have recorded in the elections we have organized, both off-season governorship elections and by-elections, we are satisfied with the performance of the BVAS. It's been performing optimally. And the BVAS was designed by our own in-house engineers. And so we are confident that what they have designed and what has been fabricated, we took into consideration the peculiar circumstances of this country and the peculiar challenges of this country. And so we'll keep on perfecting the BVAS to make sure that it performs optimally. But I will not say that any form of technology will be 100% foolproof.
All right, Dr. Okoye, I'm going to bring in the issue of virtual education, which is in your jurisdiction. Can you tell us some of the strategies that have been deployed by INEC to prepare voters and educate voters more on the election, especially in rural areas? Also putting in mind that earlier on you mentioned some of the possibilities or the reasons why people delayed in registering for the PVCs. So what strategies have you deployed in INEC?
Well, the demography of Nigeria has changed. If you look at the figure for voters registration, this CVR that we released on the 25th day of July 2022, you will see that we had a total of 11 million completed registrations. And out of this 11 million, youths who are between the age of 18 and 34 constitute over 7.8 million of those who have completed their registration. So the implication is that the demography of Nigeria has changed. And since the demography of Nigeria has changed, our method and procedures and processes of voter education must also change. So we are paying more attention. We are paying attention to using the social media for purposes of voter education. But we also realize that there are so many of our people that do not have access to the social media. And so we are involving civil society groups and organizations, we are involving community leaders, we are involving traditional rulers, we are involving youth groups, and we are involving community-based organizations at the local level for purposes of sensitization. And we are not also neglecting the use of television, the use of radio, and other means of communication in reaching the ordinary people. And so our electoral officers in the various local governments are doing their bit in making sure that we engage the various communities for purposes of sensitizing them and also educating them on our new technologies, our new processes, and also our new procedures.
Now, Dr. Okoye, we've seen, there's no way we could talk about the upcoming elections in 2023 without mentioning what is on the front burner in Nigeria, and I'm talking about security. We've seen INEC's conduct in the staggered and off-cycle elections in Osun and other places where they have the luxury, where the federal government has the luxury to deploy upwards of 20,000 policemen and security operatives. But the general elections, you have elections going on simultaneously in different parts of the country. What is INEC doing to make sure the elections are secured in terms of security as we inch to the general elections of 2023?
Well, the issue of security is a big concern, and we are not overlooking it. We normally have what we call quarterly consultative meetings with the various security agencies under the auspices of the Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security. The chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, has impressed it on the security agencies that the time is now, that the time is right for them to degrade the various security challenges we have in various parts of the country to enable us deploy well. As you know, the conduct of election is a multi-stakeholder venture. No single entity, no single commission, no single agency can go it alone. The task of securing the electoral environment to enable us deploy effectively resides with the various security agencies, with the police being the lead agency on election security. So we are discussing with them, we are liaising with them, and we are partnering with them to make sure that the atmosphere is conducive for the conduct of election. But you know, from my own experience of elections, sometimes it is more difficult to organize, undertake, and supervise off-season or off-cycle governorship election than to conduct even a general election.
Why do you say
this
so?
This is because in an off-cycle governorship election, the various political parties will organize their campaign council, and all the governors belonging to that particular party will be members of that campaign council, and they will descend on one particular state. So there's so much concentration of attention, concentration of focus, and concentration of energy in one state, and it becomes difficult. But in a general election, everybody is struggling over his or her own turf, and the person may not have, the political parties will have their attention in 37 states rather than having their in 36 states of the federation and the federal capital territory, rather than having all the attention in one particular state. But that is not to say that the conduct of a general election is a tea party. No, we are taking it very seriously. We are planning, and we are planning well, and we are also looking and assessing the places where we have security challenges. And we're also documenting people in IDP camps for purposes of recreating their polling units and recreating their registration centers in the camps where they are, because the law makes it mandatory that they must be carried along in the electoral process.
Now, aside from security issues, what other issues has INEC been facing during this period, especially as we inch towards the 2023 elections, and even with collaboration with political parties? Because we saw an extension of the candidates for the parties. So do you see the political parties cooperating with INEC so far?
Well, one of the major challenges we have noticed in terms of the elections we've conducted so far relates to the issue of vote buying and the issue of trying to corrupt the voting preferences of people at the level of the polling units. And we consider this as very serious. We have trained our presiding officers, and we are training them very well on how to reconfigure the architecture of the polling unit to ensure the secrecy of the vote. And so that's one of the big things we are doing. And we're also collaborating with the security agencies to make sure that they deploy both uniform and plaincloth security agents to the various polling units to ensure that people do not tamper with the voting preferences of the people. And so that's one big issue that we are facing. The second issue also relates to the attitude of the political parties in terms of the internal democratic practices in the various political parties, and also in their inability to also read and internalize the intendment and the new provisions in the Electoral Act 2022. So we believe that political parties should find ways and means of reading the Electoral Act 2022, internalizing the new provisions, and also applying the new provisions to their activities. And so these are some of the challenges we may likely face going forward. But I believe that the Commission has the courage and also has the presence of mind and also has the mechanisms and the protocols to make sure that all the political parties do the right things and at the right time.
Now, Dr. Okoye, I'm glad you mentioned the vote buying issues. And just before we wrap things up, we have a situation where some politicians have decided to monetize poverty. And if the elections could go to the highest bidder, then we wouldn't even bother conducting elections. So would it be right? You've mentioned some of the strategy, like the polling unit architecture to make it more secure and secret. But would it be a stretch if I say INEC should criminalize a vote buying, perhaps?
Vote buying is a criminal offense under the Electoral Act. The law does not call it vote buying, but the law calls it inducement and also has various provisions relating to electoral offences in the Electoral Act. The Commission is insisting, and we are canvassing, that the way to break electoral impunity, the way to sanction electoral malfeasance, is for us to have an Electoral Offences Commission and Tribunal to take care of the issue of arrest, the issue of investigation, and the issue of prosecution of electoral offenders. People must realize and be made to realize that electoral impunity does not pay. And unless we break the cycle of electoral impunity, people will think that it is nice and it is hip to rival in electoral offences and nothing will happen. And so we are insisting that an Electoral Offences Commission and Tribunal should be established to pilot and propel the arrest, investigation and prosecution of electoral offenders as one way of breaking this cycle of vote buying and other electoral malfeasance in our electoral process.
Dr. Festus Okoye, would like to say a big thank you to you for joining us on the conversation this evening. We do appreciate your insights and contribution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I wish you well.
You're watching the conversation here on News Central Television. We just concluded our conversation on the closure of the continuous voter registration exercise by the Independent National Electoral Commission. We'll switch gears in part 2. When we come back, we'll be discussing the just concluded municipal elections in Senegal. Legislative elections, I beg your pardon. And we'll look at that in details when we return. So stay with us.